Hey, what's going on? We're here at MP&E Cameras and Lighting, and today we're doing a little gimbal test. We've got the Defy G5 with the C100, and we've also got the Movi M15 fully rigged out with the C500. Now, gimbals are kind of new to me. I'm not too experienced in this realm, so this has been kind of fun getting acquainted with the setup and everything. Seth helped get it all set up and dialed in, so we're ready to go. I've also got a couple friends here to help me do the test, so this should be pretty fun.
I'm really glad MP&E let me come over to test out these two gimbals, because the only experience I have with another motorized gimbal like this is the Varavon Birdie Cam, and I only used that very briefly on a shoot maybe 6 months to 12 months ago. And I've actually been looking at getting a gimbal for myself, but there's a lot of things to consider, weight of the camera, what kind of camera systems you're going to be flying, the ease of use, the setup, just how the whole thing functions, and ultimately, if it actually works and does its job. So I wanted to test out the Movi, which is regarded as, the highest of the high end, certainly the most expensive on the market, but also the most highly regarded in terms of ultimate quality, against the Defy G5, which is a more affordable option, but still not the cheapest out there. So I wanted to see how these two would compare, and ultimately if that would steer me in the direction of one over the other, or maybe even going a totally different route.
All right, so here's the first take. We're gonna see how this goes. You ready? Yep. All right, let's go.
The first thing you notice about the Movi M15 is the weight, but that's precisely the point. We rigged this thing out with almost the maximum capacity of this thing just to push it to its limit and see what it actually feels like, and it certainly is heavy. When you're holding a gimbal out in front of you like that, it does start to burn a little bit, but thankfully it didn't feel excessively heavy to where it was immediately tiring on the first try. Now, doing this all day though, of course you would get tired. It's also difficult getting used to the spatial awareness you need to have while you're trying to keep your subject in the frame while moving through this obstacle course we had set up. Now granted, this is probably an extreme scenario where you wouldn't be doing these tight weaves necessarily on an actual production. You'd probably do something a little bit more gradual or only with only one turn. But it was our goal to put this thing through its paces and see how well it performed. Now on this first take, I did a pretty poor job of keeping Tiberius in the frame. We had it in majestic mode, so it's kind of just following my movements, but I noticed I had to get ahead of it, anticipate him a little bit, and know where he was going because it's following your movements rather than you dictating exactly where it needs to go. So because that was my first try at the Movi M15, we thought we'd do another take to see how I did on a second try. On the second attempt, it was immediately apparent how much easier it was once I had that initial run in terms of feeling how the camera and gimbal was moving along with my initial movements. I was able to anticipate a little bit better and ultimately keep my subject in the frame a little bit easier, but I'm still not anywhere perfect. It's one of those things that you can quickly feel how the more you do it, the better and better you're gonna get. It's actually remarkably smooth compared to how much I felt like I was moving. I really didn't even have to try to keep my body stable in terms of moving. I was more worried about making it through the obstacle course and not knocking anything over. So it is pretty remarkable how smooth this footage actually turned out when I could have possibly been trying to be even smoother with my movements. But I'm just one guy, and everyone's gonna have their own skill set, their own level of expertise. So thankfully, I had David and Tiberius there to help me out and give those additional perspectives.
For variety's sake, we're gonna throw David on there and see how he does.
And again, on David's run, you can see the Movi doing its job, keeping things stable, while he's just trying to do his best to follow Tiberius through the obstacle course. And there is a little bit of that anticipation issue where he's not quite used to how the camera's moving, but all things considered, that's remarkably good for a first attempt. And keep in mind, I haven't warp stabilized or done any kind of post-processing to this footage. This is exactly how it was shot right off the card.
And for extra variety, we're gonna throw Tiberius on there and see how he does.
Now, Tiberius isn't a camera guy. He's actually a visual effects motion graphics artist. So we wanted to throw him on the camera, someone who has even less experience than David and myself, to see how easy it would be for him to handle the Movi M15. And there are a few moments where it's not that stable and David kind of gets off the frame quite a bit, but all things considered, it's still pretty good for someone's first attempt. But how about when it's in the hands of somebody who has a lot more experience with gimbals than any of us?
All right, so now that me, David, and Tiberius have all had a chance to try out the Movi M15, we thought we'd give it to an actual professional who does this all the time. So Seth is actually gonna walk backwards and follow me through the obstacle course. This was a maneuver we didn't want to try on our own, being less experienced, but we thought we'd put it in Seth's capable hands to see how he did in this situation, to see how stable it is, see how good he can follow us through the obstacle course in reverse. Seth is doing a fantastic job right now, walking backwards, and there we go.
Seth did a great job following me as he's walking backwards through the obstacle course. And again, this isn't a situation you'd find on an average production, so we're really making it challenging on the operator to follow the path that we've set up, as well as keep the subject stable and in the frame.
Now that we've played around with the Movi M15, we're going to try out the Defy G5 and see how that does.
The G5 is much lighter than the M15, and that's because it's meant for flying camera systems that are lighter than what the M15 can handle. So it was a nice little break being able to carry something a bit lighter. But no matter what, you're carrying these things out in front of you, so regardless of the weight, after a certain amount of time, you're gonna get tired. We had the G5 in a similar mode to the Movi M15's majestic mode, essentially the following where you tilt and pan. But because the settings are different between these two systems, it was a different feeling in terms of how much you needed to anticipate, which was a bit jarring considering I had just gotten used to the M15 and now was switching to the G5.
Now it's David's turn to try out the G5.
One thing that's really nice about the G5 is that it comes with an additional thumbstick or joystick that you can mount right on the gimbal, and that gives you full control over pan and tilt, so you can adjust the camera and position your frame all by yourself, compared to the Movi, which you really should have two people operating, someone to run the gimbal and someone to run the controller.
And now Tiberius is going to give it a go.
You can see the G5 doing a good job keeping things stable. But one thing to note about the G5 as compared to the M15 is that the Defy G5 is meant to work right out of the box. They don't really want you doing a whole lot of tweaking or fine tuning. You certainly can if you want to, but you have to hook the device up to a computer and program things in that way. Compared to the Movi M15, which has all those settings built into the wireless controller. So you can dial all that stuff in and fine tune it in the field to make sure that your motors and everything are set exactly the way you want.
Now because we did it with the Movi, we figured we'd do it with the Defy G5 as well. We have Seth, who's actually the professional at this, unlike us yahoos. He's taken us through the course and again, walking backwards, which is a much more challenging thing to do on the fly. Usually you do have a spotter, which we probably should have right now, but hey, you know, we're just testing. It's all fun. If someone gets hurt, don't matter. Put a Band-Aid on it. I'll probably cut that.
I really like doing this test in the obstacle course that we set up. The one thing about these gimbals is that they're a lot of fun to use. And when you see these final shots, it's really impressive how good of a job they actually do. But we did have one more stabilizer with us, so we thought we'd try that out as well.
Now you may have noticed we've been filming all the behind the scenes footage on a GH4 and what is essentially a really cheap gimbal, just using weights, no motors here. So we're gonna see how this compares to the Movi and the Defy using this really cheap, I think it's like an $80 setup. Now, we do have a lens that has stabilization built in. We're using the 12 to 35 f2.8 on the GH4. So that is giving it a little bit of help, but really not much.
Before these brushless gimbals flooded the market, these are the kind of stabilizers that I used all the time. So I do have quite a bit of experience using stabilizers like this. And you know what? It's actually doing a pretty good job, all things considered. But that just goes to show you that the more time and practice you put into something, the better your results are going to be.
Now it's David's turn.
Sometimes it's worth it to invest in the more expensive equipment or gear, but other times it might not always be worth the cost. You just have to factor in what is it going to get for you personally. With these gimbals and stabilizers, there's really something available at almost every price point. So no matter what your budget is, you can get something that's going to work for you.
And now Tiberius is up.
And if you remember, Tiberius is the one with no camera experience. And these cheap stabilizers are harder to use if you don't have any experience. The motorized gimbals are much easier to use and much more functional if you are somebody with limited experience. So there you have it, 3 different stabilization options at 3 totally different price points. And hey, if you need a higher end gimbal but can't quite afford it, you can always rent one. I want to thank MP&E Cameras and Lighting for letting us come in to do the test, and thanks to Seth for helping us get it all set up. It was a lot of fun and really informative, so I hope you enjoyed the video as well. If you did, I'd appreciate you liking the video, and you can also subscribe to the channel for more content around all things video and photo. See you next time.
Cool.